In Section 5, we're going to continue along with full container load, but now looking at port-to-door moves, clearly different from a CY to CY environment. Another option that U.S. importers of FCL loads can exercise is that of port-to-door. Unlike a CY shipment, the contracted ocean services cover the main mode of transport from the origin container yard all the way up to a named point at destination. There's the big difference. CY to CY, essentially a port-to-port move. Port-to-door, as the name would indicate, transportation is provided from the origin port all the way to a named point at destination, typically beyond the first port of discharge. To summarize this slide, last bullet, oftentimes port-to-door moves, or simply a door move as it is often called, they imply delivery in the U.S. to an inland destination that is far from the port of discharge. This type of shipping arrangement is sometimes referred to as an IPI move, which stands for Inland Point Intermodal. And that name is pretty telling. We can see that the container or containers are going to an inland point beyond that port of discharge and via intermodal transportation. The definition of intermodal can be seen in our second bullet point. The key to this type of shipment is to incorporate multiple modes of transport under the same ocean bill of lading. There aren't going to be two bills of lading here, an ocean bill of lading from the port of loading to the port of discharge, and then a new BL for the U.S. domestic portion. It's all under the same ocean bill of lading. We will see an example of that in just one moment, but an example of intermodal or multimodal, as it is sometimes called as well, is ocean freight. A truck goes to the destination terminal, picks up the container, trucks it out to a railhead, not far, hopefully, from the ocean port of discharge, and then ships out into the interior of the United States. Trade tip at the bottom of the page, as noted previously, an IPI move is shipped on a through bill of lading, through all the way to its named destination in the U.S. Let's bring our port-to-door tale to life with a real-world example entitled Port-to-Door Moves to 3 U.S. DCs. This should be a familiar story. Let's return to our most recent real-world example, where the importer currently buys from overseas vendors in FCL quantities on a CY basis, and that has DCs in San Bernardino, California, Dallas, Texas, and Mechanicsburg, PA. Instead of operating a CY model, could this importer operate under a port-to-door IPI model, and if so, what are the variables that must be considered? The answer to the above question is definitely yes. This importer can implement port-to-door moves for each of its 3 DCs. This approach would alleviate the need for the importer to organize its own transportation from the port of discharge to the inland destinations in San Bernardino, Dallas, and Mechanicsburg. Also, with this type of move, the containers would move under a single ocean bill of lading, with coordination of transfer of the containers to a railhead or truck under the responsibility of the carrier, and the corresponding charges would all be on the same carrier invoice. Clearly, this is more convenient for the importer, but it does require quite a bit of coordination with the carrier, the freight forwarder, the customs broker for sure, because none of these containers are going anywhere off of a terminal in the United States until the goods are cleared through customs. But there are certain advantages to a port-to-door move. The following slide provides a visual of what a port-to-door ocean bill of lading looks like. We've seen bills of lading in some detail in Module 6, so we're not going to focus too much on this bill of lading, but we do want to illustrate how port-to-door moves are portrayed on an ocean bill of lading. This BL being a continuation of the previous example. Our port of loading is Rotterdam, as we spoke of in our real-world example. The port of discharge, Philadelphia, but because it's an IPI move, there has to be on-forwarding, as we see to the right, to Mechanicsburg, PA. Most relevant for our conversation, the type of move, the movement is CY to door, and actual bills of lading are prepared in this way, so the operational people from the steamship line know how to handle a given shipment. In the next couple of slides, we want to point out some things that an importer needs to think about when working with port-to-door moves. While a very feasible way to move goods to inland points, U.S. importers should not assume that every carrier, every steamship line, will offer port-to-door moves for all container sizes. In fact, it's quite the contrary. Ocean carriers are oftentimes averse to offering port-to-door service for 40-foot high cube and 45-foot containers. Third bullet, a carrier's reluctance to offer this service is driven by high repositioning costs of containers. And repositioning costs are defined as the expense to ship empty containers from an inland point back to an ocean port for return to origin. Steamship line operators have always said that repositioning costs are around the third most expensive aspect of their operating model. The first being the cost of running the ships, second being fuel, and the third being repositioning costs. Importers need to understand this when devising ways to take advantage of port-to-door moves. Let's portray this story with a supply chain perspective entitled The Impact of Repositioning Costs. Although U.S. importers may find inland point intermodal shipping attractive, it is a mistake to assume that ocean carriers will automatically move containers under those terms. Depending on the origin destination of the freight, time of year, and container size and quantities required, steamship lines may very well not accept bookings for containers to a point beyond the U.S. port of discharge. One of the main reasons why carriers avoid IPI moves is because of repositioning costs. Basically, carriers want to avoid the cost of moving empty containers from an inland point in places like the Midwest back to ports such as Houston or Norfolk. Really a function of the U.S. trade deficit, which in this instance is expressed as the inability to fill empty import containers with export cargo from those inland points. It is very expensive for the carriers to reposition containers back to an ocean port. It is important to point out that carriers are especially sensitive to sending 40-foot high cube and 45-foot containers to inland U.S. destinations. While it is more likely for carriers to offer IPI for 40-foot containers, some carriers just don't offer IPI moves for 40-foot high cube or 45-footers. The moral of the story here? Yes, IPI moves can be very beneficial to an importer. The importer cannot assume that that type of service is always going to be available for every type of container size. This will conclude Section 5, and we'll be back shortly with Section 6.